Welcome to the History Nerds United podcast. I'm your head nerd, Brendan. Thank you so much for being here. Today's guest, Patrick Winn. I'm worried about him. Let me tell you why I'm worried about him. You watch a movie where there's that intrepid journalist who's always ending up in those scary places. He knows a guy who knows a guy, and then all of a sudden he's in the jungle. That's Patrick Winn's life. And we talk about it along with his book, Narcotopia. I love this book so much. It ended up being one of the best books for me of 2024. And I just grabbed it on a whim, thought it looked pretty good. I was going to give it a chance and see, but, not necessarily something that I would normally pick up. Thank goodness I did. Blew my socks off. It's a fantastic book. Patrick has some amazing stories that are unbelievable and slightly dangerous. I'm going to shut up. Let's talk to Patrick. And here we are with author Patrick Winn, Narcotopia, in search of the Asian drug cartel that survived the CIA. Patrick, thank you so much for coming on.
Pleasure to be here.
All right, so Patrick, we're going to talk about some of the places that you've been, and even with your last book, a lot of drug dens, stuff like that. I don't know how to say this delicately or professionally, so let me just ask it. How are you still alive?
Because everywhere that I've gone, no matter how dangerous it might seem in black and white print on the page, always going in with an interlocutor. So if I'm going to a place like an opium den in northern Burma, northern Myanmar, I have worked very hard to secure the trust of someone who's from that place, who knows other people who are from that place. And so I'm not a badass. I'm just not a tough guy. I'm not actually a thrill seeker. Like, I'm not going in there for the adrenaline rush of, oh my God, someone might hurt me. I'm usually propelled into those situations out of a raging, ferocious curiosity that admittedly can probably get me to take risks because I just want to know what's on the other side of that wall. A lot of credit goes to people, some of whom asked not to be named in my writing, who get me to those places through their own networks, through their own people that they trust. And that's how it works.
Now, I think a lot of people, and I've talked to other journalists like yourself, investigative journalists, where is that line for you, right? You say you have somebody, you know somebody, but is there a line where something, the hair on the back of your neck stands up and you just go, nope, I'm not going to do it? Where's the bright line for you where you say, this is officially too dangerous, I got to back off?
What I worry about more than, say, a drug trafficker being mad at me is I worry about the local police. So I've been in situations in Burma, in a pretty remote place, where it appeared that the police were tracking us. Well, it didn't appear, they were. So in the particular scenario that's popping into my head now, I'm staying at a hotel and the person who's helping me get where I need to be, the local person, is staying in a hotel room next door. And we go to sleep, I wake up and we go to breakfast the next morning. And he's like, I was visited last night by what they call special branch in Burma. But these are the people you don't want to get the knock on your hotel room door. Just asking where you're going, who's this foreigner that you're working with, what's the deal? And in that scenario, the interlocutor, in the journalism world, we call them fixers. I'm not totally comfortable with that word. He was like, whatever, let's keep going, screw them. And I wanted to pump the brakes because I'm going to leave that country, hopefully. I'm always going to go back home, which to me is Bangkok. And I'm going to leave someone behind. And I just can't sit awake at night wondering, did I ruin this person's life who was nice enough to trust me? That is my ultimate fear. It's not, I've never had a gun pulled on me or anything like that in a drug den. It's not like the movies. I worry about the people who I might imperil.
I mean, that's tough. And Narcotopia is another one of these scenarios. Where did you get the idea to write this book? Because I need to say, too, you do a hell of a job because you are balancing so many different things. We're going to be talking about the Wei State. We're going to be talking about Saulu and his family. And then you got the CIA, you got the DEA, you've got China. Where is the entrance to this story where you say, this is what I got, and then all of a sudden everything else gets piled on it?
Once again, the entrance to the story is my raging curiosity about a particular thing or group of people. So in this case, it was the Wa. I'm originally from North Carolina, and I moved to Bangkok in 2008. So I guess I've been here almost 16 years. As soon as I got here, I'm starting to look around for stories because I'm a journalist. And I would read in the newspaper about this group of people called the Wa. Now, no one in America has heard of the Wa, and I hadn't heard of the Wa, but they were always described as this sort of sinister, mysterious group living in the hills of Burma they're all drug traffickers. And actually, if you go back in time, back to the 60s and eons before that, they were headhunters and they cut people's heads off and put them on sticks, and just sort of they were your classic boogeyman in the Southeast Asian consciousness. Just my personality, I immediately think, well, I bet they're not that bad. And I just really wanted to know more and more about them. And so over the years, I would try to get access to Wa country, Wa lands where they live, the mountains of Burma. And most of these attempts failed. The way that this book got started is finally I had a breakthrough and I was able to meet someone who was very, very high up in Wa society, in Wa state, in the Wa organization, and the government that they have in Burma. And it was off to the races from there. So it kind of felt like a lucky break that I was finally able to get access to this culture, this society. But it was really me banging my head against a door for more than 10 years. And finally the door opened a little bit.
Now, I want to step back a little bit for the less traveled people like myself. First of all, is it Burma? Is it Myanmar? Please educate me. Which one should I be saying? What is the actual name of the country?
Well, the official name of the country, if you were to ask someone at the UN, it's Myanmar. I think people worry more than they should about whether they're saying Burma or Myanmar. Burma is the old colonial name. So the British colonized what we now call Myanmar, and they called it Burma. And they took a lot of different cultures and societies that didn't necessarily get along and just sort of drew lines around their territory and called it a country.
That doesn't sound like the British, Patrick. What are you talking about?
You may have seen this movie before. Shocker that today, until today, the country is just roiled in conflict because that's not exactly the best way to go about things. Yeah, in the British days, it was called Burma. They got independence. They kept calling it Burma until a military regime, which always figures very heavily in the history of this place, said, let's ditch the old colonial name. We're past the colonial era. Now it's Myanmar. Myanmar is just in the Burmese language, is just a more poetic way of saying Burma. There's not a vast gulf of meaning between the two words. I will say this. I have heard the most diehard anti-military regime rebels say Myanmar, the preferred word of the regime. And I've heard the most staunch pro-regime cops say Burma. People flit in and out of both. Think I sort of default to Myanmar just because it is technically the name of the country. I've never had anybody grab me by the collar and say the right name. It's a little bit delicate, but it's not something to wring out your brain over.
So I'm not going to get shanked in a bar because it said Burma by mistake. That's all I really needed to know.
I would be astonished. If that happens, please call me. I'd be really delighted to hear that story.
I'll tell you which hospital I'm at.
Yeah.
Well, then, and you kind of already got to this too, and then you have the Wa state, which is within those lines that were drawn so badly by the British. Shame on them. But it's also something, and you do a really good job of talking about this, basically the terrain almost creates the Wa state. Can you kind of talk about just where is it in the country? And if you go to Wa state and you say, you guys live in Burma, they're kind of like, sure, whatever, we don't care.
More or less, yeah. It's really, really fascinating, and there's really no corollary like it anywhere else on the planet. When you look at the map of Myanmar, it's a fairly sizable, mid-sized country. And then you kind of look over to where the mountains are. There's a big chunk of those mountains that are absolutely uncontrolled by the military regime that claims total dominance over the country. Well, they don't have dominance over this area at all. It is, by all measures, a sovereign nation state of the Wa people. The Wa people being the indigenous people of that area who, are been castigated for centuries, going back to the days of European colonizers as these kind of sinister headhunting people. They've always played the role of the boogeyman. Well, today they have carved out their own state. Now, if you ask the leaders of WA State, quite a few of whom are indicted by the DEA, I'm sure we'll get to that. If you ask them, are you an independent country? They would say, no, we're not. We're part of Myanmar. Anyway, next question. Because they don't share this desire to be fully accepted by the international community. Their dream is not that everyone says, oh, yay, the WA are fully independent and they've got their flag on the wall at the United Nations and everything is groovy. They really just care about power, and they want to control their own state, and they want to keep everybody out who's not invited. That includes Myanmar's military regime. Like if a platoon from the central government of Myanmar, the military, tried to go into WA State without permission, they would not have a very good time. They really don't control this place. I mean, this is a state with its own Ministry of Finance, its own roads, its own cell phone towers, its own hydropower dams, its own highways, you name it. So it is set apart from the rest of the country. And I think that it will continue to exist for many decades to come. I'm not so sure about what we call Myanmar. I think WA State will be there, and hopefully people will recognize that this place is not going anywhere.
Speaking of people who apparently can't be killed like yourself, Saw Lu, can you tell me, how did you meet him? Who is this guy? Straight off the bat, as a journalist, Saw Lu might be like a dream, but by himself, his life story, I think, is a bestseller, and he's just a part of this. How did you meet him? What's his deal? What was that like?
I'll tell you how I met him, and then I'll tell you why his life story seems like a dream, but wasn't at first glance. It took a lot of prying to get that life story out. I met this man as I was trying to arrange a sit down with someone in WA State's top leadership. So this is an organization that is treated by the DEA as, a jungle narco cartel, whatever you want to call it. I mean, they're the bad guys, right? And much of their top leadership is sought by the DEA. The express stated intention of the DEA and the U.S. government is to snatch these guys up and bring them to the United States and hold a trial and probably imprison them in the U.S. That has not happened. So I'm trying to sit down with someone who's towards the top of the hierarchy. It's not easy when you're an American. I mean, they regard every American as a spy. So I went to a town called Lashio that is about 50 miles outside of WA State. It's in Myanmar. It's a town where the WA organization has a lot of sway. I was trying just to talk to someone who's effectively the WA State ambassador. So it's not a real country, but they have an embassy in this town and they have an envoy or ambassador. And in the course of trying to get an introduction to him and to get a sit down with him so I could move up the ladder, I met a guy who was a former officer in the WA State Army. Nice guy. And he spoke English. It's very convenient. Very few WA people speak English. And as we're working together to try to get me sitting down with this envoy so I can request a meeting with the top leadership, he basically says, if you want to talk to a WA leader, why don't you just talk to my father-in-law? And I said, who's your father-in-law? I was like, well, let's go meet him. And we had just finished dinner, so it's nighttime, and we're walking up the street in this town, Lashio, and we walk up to this. It's a house. It's surrounded by steel gates. I can see like security cameras on the awnings, and a servant girl rolls back the gate, and we're in this guy's house. I'm looking around on the wall, and I can see a photo of him. And what really struck me, Brendan, is I'd never seen a photo of like a WA leader presented in some like glorious way. There's like a gilded golden frame, and here's this guy in his green WA State Army uniform. He's got like a pistol on his hip, and he looks very like debonair. And I've never seen a WA leader presented. Usually they're presented as sinister drug lords, right? And so then the man himself comes down, and lo and behold, he was a former top 3 leader in WA State. And I assumed he wouldn't want to say much to me, being American, but he kind of plopped down and, what do you want to know? And I told him who I was. I pulled out my notepad. I had a tape recorder and everything. And I basically said, I'd like to know anything that you could tell me about what it's like to be inside this organization that is pursued so doggedly by the DEA. And he just opened up and started telling me everything. His life story is just stunning. So yes, in a journalistic sense, it was a massive, massive win. I found out pretty quickly that he used to be a DEA asset, a DEA informant. So you've got a guy who's at the top of this wanted organization who's also informing to the DEA. Now we have the makings of conflict and plot and all the things that writers want. But I just want to emphasize, it didn't all come out in a nice package with a bow wrapped around it. I had to talk to him for hours and hours and many nights to get all of the pieces of the story and then kind of click them together. Then I had to go to, say his former DEA handlers who were not easy to track down and who did not want to talk to me initially and make sure that everything he was saying was true. So I spent a lot of time clicking those pieces together, and ultimately I got a book out of it. But, as I said, it didn't arrive on a golden platter. People don't tell their life stories in a Hollywood way. It comes out in bits and pieces and dribs and drabs, and it's a lot of work to connect it all.
Yeah, I'm assuming the DEA would not want to talk to you right away. Again, being the son of a former agent, they were not chatty people, unless they needed to be for a specific instance. But how many times did you have to call up and be like, come on, I already got the goods, just talk to me? Was it 100 times or 200 times?
It was a lot. Sometimes people think I'm some sort of savant for getting their phone number, even their cell phone number. I'm just going to go ahead and tell everybody my great journalistic secret. I have a subscription to whitepages.com. If you are trying to track down someone you went to elementary school with and you know their first, middle, and last name and kind of the state they live in, you find them on this website. It costs like $6 a month. I'm not a sleuth in the night. I'm just using this website that's open to everyone. The problem was that, in talking to Saulu, this former top WA commander, I'm asking him questions like, okay, look, I got to verify this. Who was your DEA handler? And he's like, I'm not good with white people's names. Bruce. Oh, I loved Bruce. Bruce was great. And I'm like, Bruce. It's like, I don't know. Just Bruce. That was the work at figuring out, okay, who in the DEA was around in this particular period in the DEA office in Burma at that time. Okay, I can't figure that out. Who else was there? Can I call them and ask who the hell Bruce is? And that was the real detective work.
Now, with the DEA, I think it's pretty easy to kind of connect that WA state, lots of drugs, that's kind of their export. Where it gets kind of sticky is, listen, selling drugs is not a good thing. We're not going to say anything otherwise. But if the WA state wasn't selling drugs, do they have anything else that they can do where they are, the situation that they're in? If not drugs, can the WA state even survive as it is currently constituted?
No, I don't think so. The WA people are in an area that is really remote. The topography is similar to like the Rockies. Okay, this is not a place where, I don't mean Denver, I mean like up. It's not a place where a lot of food grows. They're far from any major city. The only thing that grows in their soil just magnificently is the opium poppy. And for centuries, they were growing some of the most pure, potent opium poppies and making it into opium and selling it to adventurous traders who dared to come through their lands. Didn't mind seeing the skulls on the sticks and kept going and formed relationships with them and bought their opium. So when we start to get into the 60s, 70s, 80s, that opium is turned into high purity heroin. At one point, the WA developed the ability to synthesize their own heroin, which they did in great abundance. In the early 90s, about 50-60% of the heroin sold on the streets of the U.S. came from Burma or Myanmar. And a good bit of that, or quite a lot of that, was originating from the WA. So, yeah, people shooting up in Detroit or New York had no idea where their heroin was coming from. It was coming from, originally, the source was from WA State, this place they had never heard of. Today, they have shifted to methamphetamine. So they produce high purity methamphetamine that goes all around the region. And they have a more sophisticated model, actually, where they will invite outside businessmen, criminals to set up shop on their territory, produce the meth, and they take a cut. So this is the final stage of capitalism. I don't work, you work, and I charge you a fee. Okay? You want to be the landlord, right? So they're the landlord. So they've really graduated to the top of the heap. I don't know exactly how much money they make. I would wager it's in the low billions. The UN has estimated that the overall meth trade, which the WA are a big part of, in Asia, the meth economy is $30 to $60 billion. I don't know if that's true or not. I don't actually think the UN knows if that's true or not. But the WA are making a lot of money off the drug trade, and they're using it to sustain their state. And I don't think they have many other good options.
And I don't want to compliment the drug runners and everything like that, but as you just said, there's a certain amount of industriousness here that they can't grow anything else. This is what they can grow. And then they're becoming more sophisticated about it. I think people think, oh, Southeast Asia, drugs, these people are just farming it and handing it off to somebody. But they're taking it and they are clearly taking it to the next step, the next step, the next step. No one's controlling them. They are controlling their own industry, it seems.
That's very true. I'm glad you said that. Two big things I wanted to achieve from this book. One is I wanted to show Americans this strange entanglement we have with this vilified people on the other side of the world. Two, for those who are a little bit familiar with the WA, which is not many people, but for those that are, they've only heard bad things. They've only heard that they're, the ultra villain mountain people, all that stuff. Well, okay. There's a lot of minority groups in the world, a lot of indigenous people who would like to have their own state, fought damn hard to get their own state. And not many of them have achieved that. It's really hard. The WA figured out how to do that, and they did so on the back of narcotics. And whether you like it or not, it worked. It worked, and they have achieved a high degree of sophistication. As a state, as a government, is it super, super high functioning? No, not really. They have schools, but the schools aren't very good. They have clinics, but the clinics aren't very good. Most WA people are still very, very poor. Most WA people, and there's 600,000 of them, aren't involved in the drug trade. It's something carried out by wings of their army, their government, just 30,000 troops. And the average WA person isn't passing bundles of methamphetamine around all day. But ultimately, they do benefit by having their own state. And it's nice to have your own state. Those of us who are citizens of a nation state forget how bad it sucks to be on the outside. If you are in Myanmar and you're an ethnic minority, good luck. The central military will often target, attack, bomb your territory to bring you in submission. Well, no one messes with the WA. They have anti-aircraft guns. They have armed personnel carriers. They have fairly sophisticated military that will keep you out if they don't want you there. And that is nice to have if you're a member of that group.
Now, coming back to Saw Lu, he's also kind of the perfect person to follow in this book because I don't want to get too far into everything that happens to him. I want people to read that, but he sees the top and the bottom of the WA state. He has power. Let's just say he's dragged down real low, really, really low, both literally and figuratively. When you see somebody like Saw Lu and the way it goes back, is it kind of another example of how, like you're saying, the WA state is very functionally doing what they're doing with drugs, but internally it's everything can change on a dime. Whoever's in charge that day, the whole thing could change.
Yes, basically a militarized government, so I kind of use government and army interchangeably. It's a one-party state, okay? Not a thriving democracy. Saw Lu was a part of that, and he saw his people at a crossroads. Do we keep producing tons and tons of heroin and later methamphetamine, buy weapons with it, defend ourselves, and just sort of play the role of the bad guy? Yeah, we're the bad guys. We're the drug traffickers. Come and get us if you can. Oh, wait a minute. You can't. We're armed to the teeth. Screw off. That was one path they could have taken. He saw a different path. Saw Lu was converted to Christianity, Baptist, by American missionaries, or his family was, a long, long time ago. These very intrepid American missionaries that came to WA lands in the early 1900s, okay? So he was a devout Baptist and somebody who idolized America. I mean, he did not see America's flaws. He never lived in the U.S. And so he really thought it was this noble Christian nation that uplifts the meek and all the stuff that we learn about in school that we sometimes do and sometimes don't. And he said, here's the deal. If we keep playing the bad guy, we keep flooding America's streets with heroin, they're going to come get us. America is a tough country. It's a powerful country. They're going to come for us. and we have to align ourselves with the US. So this is really just a fascinating idea. We're the cartel, but now we're going to be the cartel that's pro-America. And if America comes in and helps us out and builds the schools and modernizes our country and builds the hospitals and sends in American engineers to our territory, we'll wind down the drug trade. So the first question is, right, and how are we going to pay for everything? Well, Salu said, we'll draw on American aid. He actually did not want that much. He was asking in the neighborhood of like $50 million over a multi-year period. That's like, that's nothing.
That's in our couch cushions, generally speaking.
Yeah, exactly. I think some like A-list Hollywood stars make that much for like a movie. But anyway, he wanted $50 million and that would get things going. And, he thought eventually it wouldn't be so aid dependent. They could get their own economy going. That was an idea that wasn't sketched out as much. So he was pulling them in the pro-America direction, and he convinced some of the top leadership that this was at least worth trying out. So one of the reasons that some of the former DEA agents spoke to me is they were convinced by Salu, yeah, let's align ourselves with the big bad drug cartel. We can shut them down. We don't have to go in and do an armed paramilitary raid like we do in Mexico. We can just shut them down peacefully without firing a single bullet. And this idea really, they were really swept up in it, and it was on its way to happening.
It's honestly an idea that's so crazy it just might work.
Yes.
And again, reading how it all turned out, obviously some things went wrong, but it's so crazy it might work out. Now, we've gone over why the DEA is there, but there's another alphabet organization that's hanging out. What on earth is the CIA doing near Wei State?
The CIA's original interest in Wei State was during the Cold War. So Wei State touches China. Actually, a lot of its territory is on the border with China. There's big, tall mountains that divide China from Burma. And the CIA saw this indigenous people with a warrior ethos, and it thought, hey, what if we sort of recruit them onto Team America to just harass communist China? So the CIA, this was the original interest in the Wei from the CIA. Some of that worked, much of it didn't. We're in the early Cold War kooky CIA phase, the MK Ultra era. This is not, this is the throw it against the wall and see if it sticks era of the CIA. If we fast forward to the era when the DEA is now talking to Salu, and the DEA is now interested in forming this bond with the Wei and getting them to draw down their drug production, then the CIA had a completely different agenda. It's a little bit complicated, but CIA did not like this plan at all. The CIA does not like when the DEA makes major geopolitical decisions on the chessboard of the world. The DEA, and maybe your dad ranted about this sitting in his armchair a couple times.
He generally ranted about the FBI mostly. They were kind of, it was an Army-Navy situation. If you're going to talk smack, you're going to talk smack about the FBI. But like with Army-Navy, there's also Air Force, and we don't like them either. And like the CIA is almost kind of like Air Force. Like they're there, but it's kind of not our thing.
Got it. Okay. Well, in many parts of the world, the DEA and the CIA are on entirely the same page. And in those parts of the world, everything is fine. The CIA still thinks they're better than the DEA, and they have no problem pressing the DEA to talk about sources and where they've been that day, but they get along. But every now and then, more than every now and then, you have a situation where the DEA has its agenda and the CIA has a separate agenda. And when that happens, the CIA almost always wins. And so what we had here is the CIA is looking at the DEA trying to form this pact with the most forbidding warrior drug cartel people in Burma, right? And they said, what are you guys doing? You guys bust drug dealers. You're getting in over your head. We do that. You guys don't do that. That was A. If we look at it, it's a little bit more nuanced. I think the CIA didn't trust the Wei and generally didn't think it would work. Okay. More nuanced still. The Wei are inside the recognized borders of Burma. So were the DEA to work with the Wei and draw down the drug supply, the heroin pouring out of Wei State at the time, what you would see would be all these headlines in the papers about the drug exports, the heroin exports from Burma plummeting. It would still be a bad guy because it was run by a horrific military regime, and it was, but they wouldn't also be a country that's polluting the world with heroin. The top CIA agenda at that time was to make Burma look as bad as possible. It wanted that regime to fall so that they could help bring in democratic leadership. Okay? Listen, that's great. The Burmese people absolutely wanted and fought for democracy. It's understandable that the CIA wanted to enable that. They did not like the DEA over here mucking things up, making things complicated. And so, as the CIA often does, they sabotaged the DEA-WA plans, alliance, whatever you want to call it. And that had a very poor outcome for our friend Saw Loo.
Speaking of Saw, I don't want to get too much further into his story. Again, I really want people to peel back that onion. I was just thinking about this as I'm going through the book and thinking about what I want to ask you. Is Saw Loo a hero? Is he a villain? Or is it impossible to label him? When you look at everything that he's gone through, that he's done, that he believes himself to be, can you put a label on him, or is he just kind of everything?
Oh, he's a complicated figure. I try to never think in terms of hero or villain. What I can say is that he was incredibly brave. He was idealistic to the point of almost being naive. But those are the people that changed the world. I mean, any revolutionary, whether it's George Washington or Che Guevara, they think they have this great big idea and they're going to make it real against the odds, okay? Saw Loo was one of those guys. Some of the DEA agents I talked to, some I would now call like a friend, you know. I really related to them. I got what they were doing. I can be critical of the DEA and say that these guys I thought were on the right path. I really, really liked them. Saw Loo, I'm sorry, I never related to him personality-wise. I was completely fascinated with him, I think because me and him are so different. You know, I think way too much. I worry about everything. Saw Loo was a decider. No, I'm going to link up with the DEA. I'm going to change the fate of my race. This is a thought that has never occurred to me, okay? I'm nobody. He believed that he was anointed by God to save his indigenous people. And he believed deeply that the United States, this Christian nation, was also put in a position by God to execute this dream. So was he dogged in pursuing that? Absolutely. Was he brave? Yeah, anyone who reads the book will see all of the horrific situations that he ends up in the pursuit of this dream. Most of the feedback I've gotten seems to regard him as a heroic figure, at least sort of like Job in the Bible, someone capable of enduring extreme torment out of this devotion and this faith. So I think it is hard to put a label on him, but some people will read the book and it'll be more clear to them. They'll have a clearer fixation on what he is. For me, I like keeping it amorphous.
Now I want to throw a hypothetical at you. Let's just say somebody hears this interview and they're like, hey, I have sources within Burma, within the WA state. They call me up, they say, Brendan, let Patrick know anybody in this book that he wanted to interview that couldn't, I can get that interview for him. Who is the person that you would say you didn't get to talk to them, but you really want to talk to them to kind of fill out even more of Narcotopia?
I have never been asked an easier question in my life. And
thank you. I appreciate
it. If you also were to ask who would you like to have an open, candid dinner with, it wouldn't be Gandhi or Abraham Lincoln. It would be a man named Wei Hsueh-kang. Wei Hsueh-kang is the trafficker-in-chief of the WA. He is, by all accounts, a savant, a true genius, and somebody who defies all the descriptions of the drug lord that we would see in pop culture. So this guy does not have a harem of women. He doesn't wear gold chains. There's no pit bulls. I think I said in the book, he dresses like, you know, the assistant manager at Radio Shack, okay? He just cares about business, making money, and selling more narcotics to pile up more and more money. A lot of that money going into WA State to feed people, to buy medicine, to build roads. I think a lot of it going into his bank account, although, again, by all accounts, it doesn't seem like he really enjoys spending the money. If there's any analog in Hollywood for this guy, it might be Gus Fring from Breaking Bad, sort of Poindexter-ish drug lord hiding in plain sight, running fast food restaurants. There's nobody I'd like more to interview, but he's the ultimate, forbidden fruit, because this guy has never given an interview to anyone. In fact, he takes pains. If anybody snaps his photo, you're in trouble. No, we don't do that. We don't take photos with this guy. We certainly don't disseminate them. He likes to be in the shadows. He doesn't want to be Pablo. He doesn't want all the attention. He doesn't want you to be like, wow, Pablo, the guy that bought all those hippos roaming around his estate and with, a harem of 40 women. Does not want us even talking about him right now. So I wouldn't say that I have a respect for Wei. I do think he's probably the greatest drug trafficker to ever live. And the fact that so few people know about him, I think would make him very, very, very happy. Would love to meet the guy.
See, this is where you make me nervous, Patrick, because everything I read about him, including what you said right now, if there was an interview, you'd be like, what do I need to pack for? And really, you should be saying, this might seem like a trap to me. I'm just saying, I worry about you now. I'm going to worry about you. How does that feel?
That's okay. You and my mom can get a WhatsApp group going. My poor wife also, she worries about me too. She's also a former journalist, so she also gets it. When the curiosity just like drags you towards a subject like a vortex, it's like a tractor beam. If Wei said, come on up, I'm ready to talk, I'd say yes. So anyway, if you're listening, Wei, there's a really easy way to get rid of me. You just invite, I'm going to take the meeting.
All right. So hopefully whenever we put this episode out, Patrick, we still know where you are and that you are safe, but we shall see. All right. Last question, Patrick. And this is what I asked for everybody. You're going to change it up a little bit because, right, you have a lot of contemporary stuff in here, but there are people who stay away from nonfiction. They say nonfiction is boring. I just read fiction, or this almost sounds too much like just news. Why would I care about any of this stuff? If I sat one of those poor misguided souls in front of you and they said, why should I read Narcotopia? What would you say?
I would say I wrote this book with people like that in mind. I spent more time writing the book than reporting the book, actually, because I wanted to keep fine-tuning this so that it read like a narrative. This book is a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's called creative nonfiction or narrative nonfiction. And what that means is instead of just hitting you over the head with a series of facts, in 1862, this happened. Oh, and then in 1863, this guy, and you're just sort of flooded with proper nouns and dates. I don't like reading books like that either. I do read them because I'm interested in learning what happened. There's a reason that I focus this book on the life of an individual. Because the life of an individual is something that we can really attach ourselves to and follow it along and follow the plot of their life, as opposed to this is not a history book. This is not a history book about Wa State. It's not a public affair. It's not a current events book about Wa State. It's the story of this vilified indigenous people and their strange connection to the U.S. through the eyes of a man named Saw Lu. I will have to say, it's really hard to execute that because real life, including the life of this fascinating guy, it's not laid out like a Hollywood script. There's entire periods of his life where he didn't do anything very interesting. So I just had to spend so much time with him and the people that knew him to get everything so that I could go through and then shine a flashlight on the parts that were interesting. And it all lines up in, like I said, a beginning, middle, and end. Yeah, it's a story. I consider myself a storyteller of stories that happen to be true. I take the accuracy of what I write extremely seriously. Like I said, just because this guy told me something happened doesn't mean that I just threw it in the book. I would go and corroborate that. So it's not a history book. It's not a current affairs book. It's a story.
Well, Patrick, absolutely loved it. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it. And to echo probably your mother and your wife, please make good choices.
No one pays $30 for a book about good choices, Brendan.
Oh, Patrick, thank you. I'm done with you. And that's it for this episode. Patrick, thank you so much. Narcotopia, it's fantastic. One of the best books of 2024. Go out and get it, folks. Hit us up, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Don't forget the YouTube channel. Until next time, nerds, stay cool.
History